3D form analysis is a way of understanding three-dimensional form, the shape that makes up the products that we design. Industrial designers could be said to create practical sculptures. So it's important that industrial designers understand three-dimensional form. Now, one of the things that we're going to do in Project One Tactility is look at form, classify it, and then look at how we can transform those shapes into different ones and therefore iterate on our designs. Now, we obviously already have language for primitive shapes, things like cylinders, prisms, cubes, cones, spheres, egg shapes, pyramids, and so on. These forms are very obvious and very familiar. They're fundamental. But we need to go beyond that. We need a form classification, a descriptive form language that copes with the complexity of the products that we see around us and helps us come up with new ideas for the shapes that we give them. Let's start with some of the basic classifications. Organic forms, joined form, two identifiably different shapes joined together, and transitional shapes, two identifiable shapes that merge together to create a seamless integrated whole. So these three categories are useful ways of looking at what we can see in front of us. Let's talk a little bit more about each of them. Organic forms can be concave or convex. And indeed, often you'll see convex and concave forms in the same shape. Transitional forms can be merged. They can be distorted, looks like someone squeezed or bent an identifiable shape. They can be adaptive, where one form has been bent or shaped around to another. Or they can be divided, where a form looks like it's been sliced and translated, twisted, slid, or rotated. And joined forms, very common in products, can be intersectional, where we can see two forms that kind of interpenetrate, share some volume. They can be subtractive, where we can see like a shape has been cut out of a form. And they can be additive, where two shapes coincide. They look like they've been kind of glued together. So these are forms that we need to think of and that we can apply in our Tactility project, techniques to come up with new ideas. So this is what we're going to do. We'll be going to be looking at three-dimensional shapes, analyzing them in two-dimensional forms by taking photographs or sketching them, and coming up with new ideas to make new three-dimensional shapes. So we're going to be using existing products and design models that we make using modeling clay or foam. We're going to be photographing existing products or photographing the models that we make. We're going to be printing those photos out and putting them in our design development record books, and then we're going to sketch over those and then sketch some new designs. And this in turn will help us generate new models out of modeling clay or foam, and so the cycle continues. So the modeling clay plasticine that we're going to be using, we'll give this to you in the beginning of the project. You're going to keep that, recycle it, and reuse it through lots of different concepts. So you'll be experimenting with forms with plasticine. You'll be photographing these shapes with your smartphone or the camera that you own. And then you're going to be printing these out onto A3 paper for your DDR in either black and white or color. Black and white is perfectly okay. And then you're going to be sketching on those forms to analyze them. So you'll draw directly onto the prints that you make on A3, drawing things like the contour lines, which represent the lines that you might draw on the surface of a product, and then refine the forms by drawing over the photographs with smoother lines. And you can add details that would be a bit fiddly or that you hadn't thought of when you're actually working in the plasticine. And this will help you think of new ideas to try, which you might draw beside those photographs and then go and make them with plasticine or later on with foam. So you want to try this in an iterative process to rinse and repeat. And this iteration is a fundamental part of the industrial design process. So we don't just stop at our first idea. We keep learning from it and improving and thinking of quite different ideas through analysis and idea generation. Now, here's a tip: when you work in plasticine or even in foam, you can score or draw lines onto the model before you photograph it. And these lines can make it a little bit easier when you do the analysis a little bit later on, because you can just draw over these contours. Now let's talk about photographing models. Now here are some broad tips. In general, you want to photograph in a well-lit place, plenty of light so that the model is well illuminated. Resist the urge to use flash. Flash can actually make it harder to see the contours of the shape because the flash tends to flatten the form a little bit. Place your model against a plain background and minimize background distractions. If you've got a whole lot of stuff behind the model you photograph, it can make it harder to do the analysis when you print that photo out later on. So try and have a plain background, remove any clutter from behind the object before you start photographing. Now, most of you would probably use your smartphone to do this photography. Be familiar with how your smartphone works. For example, here you can see in this video, I'm photographing at home some of the plasticine that I've been using. Don't forget to tap to focus the camera on the thing that you're photographing, and don't get too close to it. You need to, most cameras can't do really close-up shots. So you need to sort of back away to keep a crisp focus. So you can see here I'm trying to, I've got a simple kind of triangular prism form, and I'm trying to get it from lots of different angles. So I'm taking lots and lots of photos. As a general rule of thumb, take way more photos than you need. You can always delete them later on if you don't need them. So take lots of photos, lots of different angles, and then you can decide later on which ones are the most useful to you. You can see here I was doing some close-ups of some of the details, and so going in and out. Now after you've taken some photos, what you probably want to do is just do some simple editing on your phone before you import them into your computer for printing. And what I'm doing here is cutting out some of the background, unnecessary background in the photograph, and then I'm going to adjust the exposure. So I'm making the photo brighter, but I don't want it so bright that I can't see any of the highlight details. And here I'm adjusting the shadow settings so that I can see more detail in the darker parts of the photograph. Now I'm going to keep going through and doing that with more photos, cropping, adjusting the exposure, and trying to make the photo clearer so that when I print it out, it's easier for me to draw over and to sketch over. Here I'm rotating a photo to get a good angle, and you don't have to rotate it in 90-degree increments. You can rotate it so it fits the frame a little bit better, and that makes it easier when you print it out. You've got as large a photo as possible on your page. Of course, it's quite possible to do these adjustments on your computer after you've saved them from your phone. I like to do it on my phone because I think it just ends up being a little bit faster. I can kind of vet the photos that I think are most promising before I export them to computer, but really it's up to you, depends on your hardware and software, things that you have available to you. Try and categorize the forms that you see around you, as well as the forms that you design during the project. So let's have a look at this hairdryer. When we look at the shapes, how the contours of the form, we can identify a couple of quite distinct classifications. So for example, the main barrel we can see is convex. It's outward shaped. We can also identify the handle and the barrel are merged together. They are intersectional. And the handle itself looks like it was once a cylinder that's been kind of squeezed and flattened and shaped and bent. So we could say that's a distorted shape. Looking at how the barrel flows from a narrow cylinder into a cone, we can see that those two forms are merged. And the diffuser on the end of the hairdryer could be said to be intersectional. We've got a flat shape intersecting a wedge-shaped and interpenetrating. And if we look at the back, we can see there's an indentation which we could describe as concave. If we zoom in, we can see some additional details on the product, and these could be said to be additive. The buttons have been added on, the little rubber bumper that reduces the scratching of the reflective side of the hairdryer when it's placed on a bathroom counter. These have been added onto the form although the top one, you can see there's a little bit of merging in the shape around it, which is really quite nice. So thinking about these practical sculptures, these products that we see, we look at the form, we classify, and then we can start transforming them to come up with new variations, iterations on the design. Now we can do that on an existing product. We can also do that on products that we are designing. So here, having a look at the hairdryer, we can imagine what would happen if instead of a intersectional barrel and handle, what if we made them a merged or even a distorted form? So you can see this sketch here imagines that the barrel and the handle are one form that kind of bend around like it's been distorted or bent. Other examples, you can see this one here looks like the barrel has been sliced and rotated to make the handle. So there are lots of different things that we can think of. When we start classifying the form, we get new ideas. So think of this library of forms and use them to analyze the things that you see around you, and that can help you come up with new original forms that add interest and variety to your design ideas. Now, if you'd like to read a little bit more about this, here are 2 books that have influenced me in preparing this content. The only one I know of that's still in print or available is The Elements of Design by Rowena Reed Costello. It's a very good book. It's very much a sculptural look at products. And then Cheryl Anchor Kohler's, which is actually influenced by Rowena's work, is a self-published work that's probably much harder to get, but it's still very good. And that's 3-dimensional visual analysis. If you'd like to look at these books, come and have a chat with me. I can let you flick through my copies. So I hope you find this interesting. See you in class and look forward to see what you come up with.